Welcome to Relationship Mastery, a podcast for those who want to learn how to master the art of creating happy, healthy, and loving relationships. Please join me, Adey-Jones, and my co-host, Barry Selby, each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for a lively and informative conversation on everything to do with relationships. Hi, everybody. Hi, Barry. Today's topic... Oh, yes. Hi. So today's topic is agreements versus expectations. And I once heard the great Steve Chandler. He was a teacher of mine for a while I was at USM doing their coaching program. And he talked about this agreements versus expectations. And I'd never really thought about it before.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so important in relationships. So many of us have this sort of expectation that our partner should just know things about us, or that certain behaviors are just expected. It's like, and that's creating a minefield. So I think, as redundant as it might sound, it's always good to double check with the other person. Is this something we've made an agreement about, or is this maybe just an expectation that I might have or that you may have? So
Yeah, I mean, this is such a, I mean, it's such a simple point, but it's such a big point, because the thing is, really what you're talking about here is assumptions versus actually asking for agreement. Because the thing about these expectations is we presume that the other person is going to know what we're thinking as we presume about the relationship. So, for example, it could be that when you get into a relationship with somebody, you have an expectation that they'll be monogamous with you, but
mhm.
they're just having fun and they're going to play with other people too.
Yeah.
And so without making an overt agreement saying, just so we're on the same page, and this is one thing I definitely think about in friendships too, is to actually say, in our ongoing relationship, these are the things I like to have as an agreement with you, like keeping our word, being on time, um, honoring agreements, all these
Mhm.
different things that we can say that make it conducive to be a good friend, to be in a good relationship. Because that's the trouble. Most relationships are not based on any sort of overt and expressed needs to be fulfilled. They
Mhm.
just become assumptions, and so the expectations become like I don't know. Sorry, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. I don't have one. Right, moving on.
I'll go back to mine, a minefield. But
There you go. Yeah, I like it.
a minefield. But you brought up something that just reminded me of a situation that I, um, quite a few years ago, there was a friend of mine who was married to a woman, and he was from Europe and she was from America, and they
Mm,
had met while she was in America. I mean, sorry, other way around, while she was in Europe.
yes.
And they got married and had a family
Mm,
and were together for many, many years. But when they'd first started dating, because she lived here and he lived in Europe, they had this agreement that they had this sort of, what was the word? Don't ask, don't tell agreement.
like an
That
open door policy sort of thing.
Yeah, in the beginning, this is way back when they first started dating, prior to
Mm,
their marriage. So anyway, years later in their marriage, he discovered that she was having an affair. Wasn't sure if it was the first or of one of many, but when he said something to her, her response was, "But we had an agreement that it was okay." Now, in his mind, the agreement was only for when they both lived in separate continents.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
and once they got married and had a family, that wasn't an agreement anymore. And I'm not saying that, I mean, I would have made that assumption. I would
Hmm.
have made an assumption once you take the vows that you're now monogamous and in this relationship and only in this relationship. But it really illustrates that, um, on an extreme case, I know, but how somebody could take that so literally and and continue throughout that marriage to sort of do what they had agreed upon. Um, and I have to question whether that was a really an adequate response to being caught out in an affair. Well, this is something we agreed on 25 years ago.
Well,
Um,
yeah. I mean, I just jump in on that because the thing is, I totally get where you're coming from, and I've been in the same place. That with a
mhm,
certain point, there's that, and this is again, it's all assumption. Is we
yeah,
assume that where at this point in the relationship, this can happen, or in this part of the relationship, it shouldn't happen, or whatever those things are. And I know for me, I was actually with a friend of mine on Sunday having lunch. We were talking about like dating and stuff, and I said, for me, I sort of have this line inside in my standards, so to speak. Is if I'm going out with somebody and we start kissing, that's a line that once I cross that line to kiss somebody, so that is, swapping fluid, so to speak, is that I won't be doing that to anybody else.
Hmm.
Whereas some people, until there's a ring on the finger, they'll do anybody they want. So
Hmm.
we need to verify what the agreements are and also what our standards are, because people have different variations of what they believe is the boundary they won't cross
Hmm.
versus the other person's, like, as soon as I reach this point with somebody, then all bets are off, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's good to
Yeah.
have clarity.
I totally agree. I don't know about. I don't know. I've never multiple dated, so you're probably right. For me, if I've kissed you, I'm probably just with you. But I know
Right.
so many people that you know, beyond just the kissing, they've actually sort of become intimate and have a sexual relationship with somebody, and they've never clarified it, and then they're mortified when they find out that this other person has been sleeping with many different people. And
Yeah.
another, and I get it, and I think certainly I was raised to not talk about certain things, that it was just sort of, I don't know how to put it, not rude, but just sort of, I don't know what the word I would use for it, but you just didn't talk. There was assumptions. We made so many assumptions. I don't think I ever checked with anybody once I'd been intimate with them sexually, that I didn't ever say to them, "No, I'm the only one now, aren't I?" I just assumed that if they were having sex with me, they weren't having sex with anybody else.
It is definitely one of those. There's certain conversations that are almost like you don't want to walk there because you should know better, sort of thing. It's like you shouldn't
Yeah,
need to ask.
yeah,
But the truth
exactly.
is,
That you've
but
just put
but
your finger on it.
yeah, but
That's what
it
it
is
is.
that.
Yeah, you just put it's that I shouldn't need to ask. I
Right,
shouldn't need to clarify this. Well, that is an assumption, and there,
right,
right there, that
right.
shouldn't need to. Well, you know what? We're all different, and we all have different um, expectations or norms. Even norms. What's normal to you might not be normal to me. So there's
Absolutely.
nothing wrong with being clear and clarifying situations. And yeah, that's the real one that can trip you up. I shouldn't have to ask. I shouldn't have to bring this up. And it's like, oh, that is not a good one.
No, because I mean, God, how many people have been got in trouble by having that tape running in their heads,
Yeah,
assuming they don't need to ask?
yeah,
And the thing is that, especially, I mean, talking about that person, that friend of yours, and his relationship, even for different countries, there are different rules. I mean, obviously, each individual is different as well, but some countries have a standard of behavior, a standard of progression of relationship that differs from other places.
yeah.
So to actually ask what may be a very silly question, the old statement is like, there are no stupid questions, just stupid assumptions. Is the
Hmm.
thing is that any question you ask, especially from a place of honesty and saying, I just want to know, that before we get into bed together, once we do that, there is a commitment we have here. Because that's
Hmm.
what I feel. Is that true? Because
Hmm.
then before you enter. That's the other part. Is we do tend to do this in hindsight. So to be transparent enough, it's almost like being as childlike enough to be asking questions about every single piece. But it's almost that sense of innocence, but also that sense of integrity to say, I want to know that when we get to this point, what do you believe is about our relationship? Because for me, that means we're now monogamous, we're in a committed relationship. What do you think about that?
Hmm.
And then this episode says no. It's like, I may need to reconsider our options.
Yeah,
Because the other part of this, of course, is about, we talk about red flags and green flags. Is actually we haven't talked about it yet. Have we? No, we haven't. But the idea about red flags and green flags being these are the deal breakers and these are the must haves.
yeah.
And this thing about when you make assumptions, you don't find out till too late that what they just raised was a red flag and you didn't see it. That can be really uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, I was once in a relationship, a monogamous. I can't even say the word today.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. We know the word. I'm not going to try again. Relationship with
Monogamous.
monogamous. I'm keep tripping up over it.
It's
All
easy.
right.
It's
Well,
monogamous. It's easy.
okay. So back to that relationship. It
Yes,
was
indeed.
with it was with somebody from Italy. And when I found out that they were cheating and had been cheating the whole relationship, and this was an agreement that we had that there would be no cheating, um,
Okay.
um, I was told at the end, well, you shouldn't have been with an Italian if you'd expected that. And
So
I remember thinking,
Italians,
that
why?
wasn't our agreement. But what
Yeah.
was, but it, what was, it, he was trying to turn it around to being like, because of my culture, you should have expected this. Again, the expectation versus the agreement. So his
Yeah.
thing was, we had this agreement, but you should have expected this. So it ended up being my fault that I had got into a relationship with an Italian. So I thought that was fascinating.
That is a very, very messy way of covering your own butt, so to speak, because that is not
Exactly. I
at
know
all.
exactly.
Yeah.
I was basically told, don't don't expect our agreement to stay in place. You should have had the expectation that it wouldn't. So it was like, talk about a turnaround on agreements versus expectations.
Yeah, let me suggest this one thing. When you make an agreement with somebody, it should last more than 5 minutes.
Well, I think it should last as long as it does until you make a new agreement.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it is. That's the other part of agreements. It's almost like you say up front. When we make this agreement, how long will that agreement last? you know.
Exactly, until you come together again and say, you know what, I don't want to honor this agreement anymore. How do you feel
Yeah.
about that? Exactly. I mean, it's not a pledge for life. It could be simply, I mean, and we're talking about some of the most serious agreements versus expectations. But even down to how you live together, the agreements you make about who cleans the kitty litter out, who
Hmm.
you know cooks dinner and who cleans up after. Simple things like that. And so often, and it is the small things, it's the tiny things that, again, people go, well, I shouldn't have to ask. Well, you know what? Maybe the other person just isn't on the same wavelength as you. There's nothing wrong with that. So you
Right.
very nicely bring it to their attention and say, you know, can we have an agreement that you put the toilet seat down? Not this expectation.
And that is the thing, and I mean that's the other part too. Especially when people who've been living in their own lives on their own come together in a relationship, they may also come in with a lot of assumptions. I know I've done the same thing in the past, where basically because I had always done things a certain way when I was with a partner, I didn't think to ask, do they do the same things, do things the same way I do?
Hmm.
Because it was almost like an assumption, like, of course they must. It's like logical in
Yeah,
my own small world, so to speak. So the understanding that even the simplest things like the toilet seat, like the washing the dishes, do you use a dishwasher? If you didn't use a dishwasher, do you wash your dishes up? Do you let them pile in the sink? Those things, and for me personally, because this one's on my radar because I've definitely had the experience of I clean up as I go. I'm a very lazy cook in a way. Is that I love to clean up everything as I'm cooking. So I get to the final plate, I've got like two things to clean up and I'm done.
yeah,
Thing is, some people when they're cooking, if they're cooking at home, leave things in the sink and on the countertops, and it's like there's piles of stuff everywhere. Then they go eat, then they clean up. And that for me is infuriating because it doesn't work for me. I want to be done when I'm eating. And so I've had to learn, even on that level. It sounds so simplistic. So when you cook, how do you clean up? How do you do things, and why? And I understand some people they don't want to deal with anything with the mess up until they finish eating. And I'm like, no, I want to be done. So when I finish eating, I put my feet up and be completely done.
yeah.
And so little nuances that sound so simplistic, but like the cap on the toothpaste, the toilet seat being up and down. These little things can destroy relationships. So to
Exactly.
actually talk about them early is a smart move.
Yeah, I'm laughing here because I'm thinking you and I could never have lived together. So I am one of those cooks. I love to cook. I want
Mhm.
a spotless kitchen before I cook. I want all my little sort of everything is prepared and ready to go and everything. But my
Right.
God, when I finish cooking, my kitchen is a mess. But I have two giant sinks and everything's buried in them, so you can't see it. It's not like because I would not want to be looking at the messy kitchen while I was having dinner. But yeah, I do tend to immaculate and then mess. So,
Yeah. But that's the
but
thing is that's what works for you,
yeah,
and it's
exactly.
what works for me. So, I mean, this is gonna sound so silly to say this, but ultimately, when you get in a relationship with somebody, realizing you with somebody who could be so different from you on the simplest levels.
Yeah.
At least knowing that's what's going to happen or can happen gives you a sense, at least, of peace when you discover they are different.
Yeah.
So that you do that. If your if your fiance knew that beforehand, and presumably they were okay with it, then it'd be all right. But of course, if that becomes a deal breaker, better not front them. You already invested time, energy, and sex with somebody before you find out.
Yeah. And you know what happened? Oh, feedback there.
Yeah, that's good.
Um, that was weird. Um,
Yes.
but you know what happens is when we, and it's always the little things. It's not the big thing. Well, could be the big things too, but it's
Right.
the accumulation of the little things that you have an expectation about, not an agreement, and you hold it in and you build on that resentment. And it's like that bag of rocks on your back. It's like one more negative rock, one more thing that person has done to piss you
Yeah.
off. And then all of a sudden, it's like the other person is innocently going about their life, and you just hurl this bag of rocks at them. It's like, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, and you didn't do this. And the poor other person is sitting there going, "Whoa, what just hit me? I didn't know that you wanted me to do those things." And it's so unfair to do to the other person. And yet, if you have an agreement, there is no resentment. Something
Right.
happens, maybe the agreement is broken, and I'm not talking about the big ones like having an affair or something. I'm talking
Mhm.
about the minor little things that, we agreed it was your job to do this, something like that. It's so easily resolved. You come to the person as soon as that agreement has been broken, and you said, "We had this agreement. Can we talk about it?" And the other person can say, "Oh yeah, I'm so sorry. I forgot." Or,
Mhm.
"Can we change that agreement?" Or whatever it is. It's so easy to deal with, and it's clean, and it's just about that one situation, not
Yep.
the 10 that you've been carrying around and
Right.
adding to until you explode. So,
Yeah.
so important. And this goes beyond just our relationships with
Oh
our
yeah.
significant partner. It goes to our relationships with our children, with our friends, with our siblings. It goes to our workplace agreements, agreement you have with your boss, because again, that can get so messy when
Yeah.
a boss has the expectation of an employee without being clear with the agreements that are made. What are the parameters of that job? What are the you know expectations that have been agreed on, clearly laid out.
Hmm.
So it's such an important subject, this subject.
Well, the reason why I think it's important is because with agreements, the thing about agreements when they're not kept is that you lose trust, and the
Yeah.
relationship is vital. And in fact,
Yes.
I've talked about this before in other places because trust is one of those things that we think we can just build with somebody. But one of the ways to build trust is to have agreements that you keep.
Hmm.
And so one of the things about agreements, we have this tendency is we make an agreement and then we move on without thinking about remembering it, recording it, keeping it safe. So I've always said to my clients, and I've done this myself because I had to learn the lesson the hard way, is that when we have agreements, like you were saying, one of the things is about renegotiating. Well, if you don't write it down in the first place or don't document it in the first place so you know what it is, how do you know what you're going to renegotiate? So it's important for us to make sure you do make note of what your agreements are so that one, it's easy to remember them, but secondly, then you know when you made a mistake and you violate them. The
Mm.
second part is that when you realize those agreements are untenable or don't work for you, then to be able to renegotiate in good faith, not just to avoid stuff, but in good faith is a valid thing to do. And the other part as well, which is kind of a big piece of this, is when you have agreements that don't work for you, is don't say yes just to please the other person. Be willing to say no, that doesn't work for me. So you can choose a more mutually beneficial agreement that then can work for you both. Because
Yeah.
yes, expectations are just cleaning off all those agreement structures, so there's no ability to build trust. And expectations, that's the other part of the expectations, because as you said with your friend in Europe, the friend with the lady in Europe, the expectation was an absolute devastation of any sense of trust.
Hmm.
So to build trust and having agreements is for me one of the fundamental building blocks of a healthy relationship. And expectations is one of the easiest ways to knock them down. So
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely
No, that's
important.
fascinating. I'm listening to you thinking, God, write them down. And I kind of find myself going into that, oh, really? We have to write them down. But
The reason being is because recording them some way keeps it more present to us. That's the reason why. I
yeah,
mean, you can do it in a, you can put them on a poster board, or you can put them in your phone, or you can just repeat it 7 times to yourself. Whatever works for you.
no, but I'm agreeing with you. Initially, I was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. But I mean, we do it
Okay.
we do it with our children. We
Hmm.
absolutely have these agreements with our children of, this is what we expect of you. This is the agreement you're making with me. And we actually do put it, some of us put it on a chalkboard for our children to know. I didn't, but I've certainly seen other parents do it. I've gone to other parents' houses and kitchens and seen these agreements written on the chalkboard for the kids to see every day. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So I have a client right now that's about to they're about to move in together, and there's
Mm.
certain things that she has concerns about, but is sort of hesitant to bring up.
Ooh.
And I have encouraged them that
Yes.
that before moving in, number one, you have to be free to speak your truth. You have to be
Yes.
free to share your concerns and your expectations, and then you have to agree upon them. And
Mm.
I have absolutely encouraged her that this is a very, very important step before moving in together. Um,
Agreed.
it's pivotal for me. I mean, it's the fact that there's concern about um, losing him if she brings these things up is like that alone is like you're not ready to move in together. And you're
Right.
not really ready to be in this relationship if you're holding part of yourself back. You have to
That's
be able to voice, your desires, your fears, your expectations, your dreams. You have to be allowed to express those and then see what you agree upon and what you don't. And then you
absolutely.
decide if that's a deal breaker or not.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, people tend to be in this bad habit, or have that bad habit of getting so excited to move in together because it's like, oh, get to be together the whole time, it's wonderful, and it totally steamroll and ignore anything like this.
Hmm.
So the fact that she's even thinking about it is a good start. But the second part is the fear of not getting the agreements you want, so you'll move in together anyway.
Hmm.
Doesn't make any sense for a healthy relationship.
No, I know.
So what you said is so true. It's like if you're not even willing to ask the questions, you're not ready for a relationship. Is right on. It's so it sounds so obvious in a way, but it's like it is beyond that. It's so vital
Mhm.
because we as people we, we're assumption machines at times, and we forget our own self support, which against money self support practices is to ask what you really want, which is agreements. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
the agreements that
key.
the other person agrees with you. Other than that, it's just a
Yeah,
desire. It's a desire you have of how the relationship should unfold. Um,
absolutely.
and that does bring us back to a big crux here for a lot of people. They don't express what they want for fear of pushing the other person away or for fear of appearing too demanding or too rigid or too whatever. A lot of people feel, well, it's not romantic to lay it out. It's better that I just, let them come up with it on their own. And it's game playing. I think one of the most romantic things is having two really strong individuals who are willing to put voice to their feelings and their desires as opposed to just
Absolutely.
sort of holding it back and in fear, as I say, of being too much for the other person or pushing them away. It's right there. That's an unhealthy relationship. If
Oh
there's
yeah,
fear there of being
absolutely.
yourself, it cannot be healthy.
No, what came up for me when you're saying it was such a visceral thing is the fact that, we expect our partners to be mind readers, so we shouldn't have to ask them anything.
Yeah.
And it's so not true. And partly I think to blame is how we've been raised and how we've been trained, but also how the most of the entertainment media teaches us. Like, you don't need to lay out ground rules and
Mm,
agreements and other things too, because you should just know each other, and then you can just be fall in love and it'd be perfect.
mm,
Based on the divorce rate, I would suggest that's not true.
mhm.
So yes, when people are quote evolved and awake, and that was in air quotes for those people listening to the broad podcast, the willingness to actually state for the other person's benefit and for your own benefit, this is what I value for myself and what I'd like to have in our relationship. What do you value and want to have in the relationship? If you
Yeah,
put those up front, absolutely you can make a healthy relationship. In fact, I would say it's a deeper relationship because you've opened up more space for vulnerability and transparency.
yeah,
So be be vulnerable enough to ask what you really want, and be vulnerable enough to ask what you really don't want. Like, what are your boundaries? What is your clear agreements you want to have? Because it will make your relationship better, even though it may not sound that way initially.
yeah, exactly, and I totally agree with you. It is a awful thing that we've culturally been fed that it should all happen organically, and we should just get each other, and and all these things that are just as I they're not even landmines, they're pitfalls. I can just see we all going
Big time.
tumbling
Big
tumbling into
Yeah.
things. I wanted to share I have a teacher that's, I love dearly, and she has and I love her husband too. They're a beautiful couple, amazing couple, but they have one night a week that they call the State of the Union night, where they actually set time aside to talk about the state of their union, how and
Mhm.
their marriage, and how and it's they do it with humor and it's funny, and they also have like date nights and things like that. They don't do the State of the Union while they're out on a date. This
Oh,
is
definitely.
just no, just a time set aside to just check in with each other and just be like, how was your week? How did was there anything that you felt that you might not have shared with me, or or just anything. And it's just a really, I mean, don't do it with my relationship. Mine's just an ongoing. We just, I suppose we're always checking in with each other. But I just thought that was fascinating. What a wonderful way to, because and they're in business together. That's the other thing. They
Oh,
do it
yeah.
because they're in business together, so they're together all the time. And
Mhm.
there's going to, sometimes you really have to separate out the business from the relationship. And because when you're working together 24 or together 24/7, um, I do think it is important, especially in their case, to have this State of the Union conversation,
It's
because things can come up in business. And, so it's a fabulous idea, I think.
I recommend highly. The thing with especially people who work together and live together in that setting is you need to set up boundaries, not with each other, but with the environment, so that when you are done with work, you're done with work.
Yeah,
And when you're at
exactly.
home and you're romantic and having a time being in a relationship, you're like, okay, nothing about work from this point forward until this time in the morning, whatever that is.
Hmm.
And yeah, you definitely any healthy relationship, especially when you've been together for a while, if you've been, and especially if you've been married, you've got kids and other things too. The idea of date night is like an alien idea, but to have specific days of the week, or if it's that bad, every 2 weeks, to go out with just the two of you and have a wonderful time together. And on top of that, as you said, the State of the Union is a wonderful additive because some people look at that and go, "Oh, I don't want to face that. I just want to just have the relationship go along the way it is." But we get the bad habit of relationships
Hmm.
where we just get to this cruising along without even thinking about it, and so the relationship doesn't have impetus for us because we're just in the relationship. So, in a way, a State of the Union is a reconnection back to why you're there,
Yeah.
which is such a great resource to use. So, I recommend definitely agree with that. It's a good idea.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that for a second, my fiance and I, Hootie, is we'll either one of us will say at some point. I mean, we go out on date nights anyway, but there's a
Good.
certain point. Well, yeah, but sometimes I can feel that because of both our jobs are so demanding that sometimes either one of us will say we need and we have two restaurants that we go to that are our what we call a our connecting restaurants. There's just
Mm,
two, and it's where we actually sort of and it's at a sushi bar is one of them. So we're sitting right next to each other. It's not like looking somebody at the other end of the table. And the other
yeah.
one is actually a different restaurant, but we sit at the bar on a corner and we're facing each other and we're really close and we can touch each other in the nice way, touch an arm, or
Public.
lean or lean in and give somebody a peck on the cheek or something. It's not
Hmm.
sitting far across the table. And what the way we say we need one of those we need, a sushi restaurant tonight, or our sushi restaurant, or this place. I'm not naming names of restaurants we go to, but what it does is it lets us both know that for either one of us, we're feeling a little disconnected. It's the
Hmm.
way we go to reconnect deeply with each other.
Nice.
And so, and we go to other restaurants too, but the intention behind these two restaurants is this is where we connect deeply. And the reason
Yeah.
I say that as well is often when you're cooking at home and you're doing the dinner and then the dishes, there isn't time for that. I mean, at least in a restaurant, as I say, you're being served. So you're just really with each other. You're really connected. You're right there looking at each other and you're really talking.
Hmm.
So,
That's healthy.
yeah.
And the thing is, the fact you're sitting side by side,
Hmm.
that's a paradox of the relationship too. Because the thing is, I've said, talks about how in a relationship when we're facing each other, we're so unaware we can't even see where we're going together because we're actually looking at each other, which sounds romantic, but it's not functional. Yes, you can spend time doing that, but the others sit together facing the same direction, so you got like a direction where you're going.
Yeah,
It's such a key part of relationship building as well. But that's a beautiful idea because you've now created environments that connect you back to each other, which is a beautiful choice to make. So
exactly.
good. Well done. Wonderful.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, that's it for today. So thank
Yes.
you everybody for joining us again. And thank you, Barry. And we will see
Thank
you
you.
all next week.
Yes, we'll have some more joyful stuff to share about. So take care of yourself.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Bye, Barry.
Bye, Del. We trust you enjoyed this episode and invite you to share this with your friends and loved ones. In fact, please subscribe to our Relationship Mastery podcast. That way you'll get each new episode fresh and shiny as soon as it is released. We'd love to hear from you as well. So go ahead and enter your questions and comments at relationshipmastery.show. Take good care. We will connect with you in our next episode of Relationship Mastery.